Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story: is the head of the Chinese Communist Party losing power? A highly authoritative source told NTD that the answer is yes. All that starting with a stroke last summer. Details on the evidence.
You can clearly see that Xi Jinping has an abnormal line on the right rear side of his head from this picture, just below the lower right part of his scalp. You can see that there is clearly a scar tissue in that area.
A U.S. intelligence report says CCP leader Xi Jinping holds over $1 billion in assets through relatives. Details on the wealth Chinese Communist Party officials appear to have generated from corruption. Total transparency regarding Chinese money flowing into U.S. colleges. A new bill demands that any gifts or donations, regardless of amount, from China must be reported. And Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth announcing plans to boost deterrence in the Indo-Pacific region. Details on how the U.S. will arm a U.S. treaty ally in China's neighborhood. We begin with breaking news. According to insider sources, the leader of the Chinese Communist regime, Xi Jinping, suffered a stroke during a major meeting last year, and his power has been significantly weakened since. That's reflected in recent political purges within China's central governing body, especially its military command structure. Those efforts are likely pushed by Xi's internal enemies inside the party as they attempt to dilute Xi's power. We tapped China News commentator Tang Jingyuan for more. Health conditions are top secrets for authoritarian leaders. Heads of regimes like those in Communist China and North Korea believe guarding such secrets is critical to retaining their power. But China's Xi likely failed in that regard. China Affairs commentator Tang Jingyuan and other separate sources told us that a major incident happened to Xi last year.
Last October, we gained access to a highly authoritative source which told us that Xi Jinping suffered a severe stroke during the third plenum event, collapsing on the spot at the meeting venue. This was a very serious incident, but the Chinese Communist Party has been making every effort to cover it up. Ultimately, Xi's loss of power is indeed closely related to the stroke.
NTD has verified that this is a highly trusted insider source. The same source previously disclosed critical intelligence to our media, which came out publicly later on. That's including breaking developments tied to the COVID-19 pandemic in China. On top of that, photo evidence echoes the account. 1 month after that political meeting where the stroke took place, Xi made his first appearance, receiving the Vietnamese regime head. However, photos of Xi from a Vietnamese state newspaper were entirely censored on Chinese internet sites. We tested that censorship on China's largest search engine, Baidu Image Search. But why the censorship?
You can clearly see that Xi Jinping has an abnormal line on the right rear side of his head from this picture, just below the lower right part of his scalp. You can see that there is clearly a scar tissue in that area. We consulted several medical experts, including experienced surgeons, and the preliminary conclusion we can draw from the scar tissue is that Xi Jinping likely underwent surgery on his brain around that time. We all know that most people would lose consciousness temporarily after a stroke. In my view, it is highly likely that at that time, Xi Jinping lost his military power, leading to a reorganization of the power structure within the party.
Tang said the reason why Beijing hasn't seen a political coup is because the Chinese regime hasn't chosen Xi's successor. Xi has kept a tight grip over Chinese systems over the past decade, and the prospect of overhauling that would not be a one-kick game. Though there are signs of big framework changes. Last year alone, the South China Morning Post published a tally showing 56 senior Chinese officials were investigated or purged, marking a record high. One latest target could be He Weidong, the third top-ranking official in the Chinese military. He's seen as Xi's choice to lead an invasion of Taiwan. He has not been spotted in public for weeks. A Tuesday report from the Washington Times made the same prediction, citing U.S. intelligence and analysis from senior defense officials. Many believe Xi is the one behind the purge, noting it's an effort to assert his authority and demand absolute loyalty from regime officials. Also, political purges in the name of anti-corruption have become known as one of Xi's favorite schemes. But Tang views it differently, saying this could be proof that an opposing force is trying to cripple Xi's authority. Since late last year, an increasing number of Xi's most trusted aides, especially the ones in the Chinese military, have disappeared or faced investigations or purge attempts. But some senior officials who appear to oppose Xi's supremacy are still active on Beijing's political stage. That includes the second-in-command of China's military, Zhang Youxia. We will expand on this topic in future reports. A U.S. intelligence report says Chinese leader Xi Jinping holds over $1 billion in assets through his relatives. The report also listed wealth estimates and corrupt activities of other high-ranking Communist Party officials. We spoke to Colonel Grant Newsham for his reaction. Newsham is the author of When China Attacks. Grant Newsham, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
I'm always glad to be here.
Now, first off, what are your thoughts on this 6-page unclassified report that was released last week, about 2 years late?
Well, it's only about 4 pages. My guess is that when Xi Jinping and the top CCP leadership read it, that it caused them an awful lot of pain. But that's from pinching themselves so hard to see that there was nothing in the report. This is bad. As I said, it's about 4 pages. 3 pages are a discourse on corruption in China. And there's 1 page which refers to a 2012 news report about Xi Jinping's wealth and the then premier of China, his wealth as well. But it says in the report, well, we don't really know if Xi was tied to it. It was just his relatives. We just aren't sure. And then there's a reference to 2024, supposedly Xi having, or his family having $1 billion in assets somewhere. But they said once again, they don't know if Xi's tied directly to it. It may just be he doesn't know anything about it. And then they list about 5 or 6 relatively low-ranking Chinese officials who were publicly revealed as being punished for whatever, but part of the charges were corruption. But once again, no specifics on the wealth of any Chinese Communist Party leader. There's absolutely nothing there. And just breathtakingly, the report says, well, the Chinese don't report this information, so it's hard to tell actually who's anything about the topic, about wealth or corrupt activities of these people. This is really astonishing. They had 1.5 years to do it at least. They had all the resources of the U.S. government, all the money they wanted, and this was all they could come up with. It's either breathtaking incompetence or else it is really an insult to this administration, saying, well, you told us to do this, well, here's your 4 pages. Take it or leave it. So you can see I'm not very impressed with it.
I do want to dig into that a bit because this was due in Congress in December of 2023, but it was delayed for unspecified reasons. Why do you think there was such a long delay to produce something that was, say, as short as this?
My guess is that the Biden administration didn't want to do anything that embarrassed the Chinese Communist Party. They always had this belief that through intensive diplomacy, we could work out our problems, and China would be nice, sort of like a giant Canada, or at least as Canada used to be. And I think the administration didn't want to do it. The intelligence community didn't think that they had to follow the law either, nor did the State Department. They were both required to put this together jointly. And I think it was a top-level decision. But that is very much in line with really standard practice of not doing anything that the Chinese Communist Party won't like. Same reason that nobody made any real effort to punish China for the fentanyl attacks, which have killed well over 500,000 Americans. This was just part of that.
Now, of course, this was finally released last week. This does come amid reports that, President Trump has been indicating he does want to have a call with Chinese regime leader Xi Jinping, although now Secretary of State Rubio is saying that there is no date set for that. How likely is, Trump's potential push for more diplomacy with China part of this, say, lackluster release?
Well, it's always possible. But at the same time, I have my doubts, because as I said, there's been a year and a half to get this done, and they could have had a lot more in this, even without sort of getting the real spies involved. They just had to, for one thing, they could have asked the reporters who did the original New York Times and Bloomberg reports in 2012 for their details. In fact, their reports had details, and you could have dug into that. My guess is that this has been in the works for a long time, and nobody really wanted to do anything. And the administration probably didn't know exactly how they were going to be stiff-armed in this case.
Well, Grant Newsham, thank you so much for your time.
Well, glad to be here. Thank you.
Total transparency regarding Chinese money for American colleges. That's the demand from a bill moving through Congress. The House passed the measure Thursday. It's called the Deterrent Act and was backed by Republican lawmakers with some Democratic support. The act requires U.S. colleges to report any gifts, contracts, or donations, regardless of the amount, that come from countries with national security concerns like China and Russia. The reporting threshold was $250,000. Harvard University received $30 million from China from 2012 to 2020. The actual number may be even higher, because that $30 million did not include donations from China valued at less than $250,000. According to the Department of Education in 2020, Yale University failed to report $375 million in donations from other countries. Some of that foreign money came from Chinese tech companies, Huawei and ZTE. Both of them were added to U.S. sanction lists over national security threats tied to the Chinese Communist regime. The U.S. arming a treaty ally that also neighbors China. Defense Chief Pete Hegseth announcing a plan to reestablish military deterrence in the Indo-Pacific region, together with the Philippines. Here's more.
Hegseth met with Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. and Defense Minister Gilberto Teodoro in the capital, Manila, today. He reaffirmed Washington's ironclad commitment to a defense treaty with its Indo-Pacific ally. He emphasized the U.S. was not seeking war, but that deterrence was especially necessary considering threats from Communist China. Chinese forces in the last 2 years have confronted Philippine vessels in the South China Sea, claiming they were encroaching into Chinese waters. Chinese military aircraft have also approached Philippine patrol planes to drive them away from disputed fishing grounds.
On top of existing plans to modernize the Philippine military, Hegseth said the U.S. would send more military capabilities to the country, schedule more joint training drills, improve defense industrial cooperation, and launch a bilateral cyber campaign. Satellite images show China deployed 2 long-range bombers around a disputed shoal in the South China Sea, days ahead of Hegseth's visit to the Philippines. Both China and the Philippines claim the Scarborough Shoal. Chinese Coast Guard vessels have clashed with Philippine fishermen frequently near the atoll in recent years. Coming up, a warning from the director of the FBI, Kash Patel, saying China and Russia are shifting focus to target the northern border. That's as the U.S. intensifies its crackdown on crime and illegal immigration at the southern border.
The enemy adapts.
And the Senate House in Italy is honoring one woman for standing up against forced organ harvesting in China. We're on her efforts to raise awareness of this crime just after this break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A vulnerability at the northern border. FBI Director Kash Patel warning China and Russia are targeting the northern border as the southern border becomes more difficult to penetrate. What can be done to enhance U.S. border security in both the north and south? NTD's Jack Bradley spoke to John Torres, former acting director of ICE, and John Fishwick, former U.S. attorney for the Western District of Virginia, for insight.
John Torres, John Fishwick, thank you both very much for joining us here today.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Now, in today's Worldwide Threats House hearing, FBI Director Kash Patel was asked about foreign nationals from China and Russia trying to sneak into our country. Here's a clip of that.
And what they've done is utilize, as we were just discussing with your colleague, the northern border to shift their resources and affiliations to pour in known or suspected terrorists through the northern border. They haven't stopped through the southern border. They just know that we are setting up a pretty monumental effort down there to stop any known or suspected terrorists from entering the country. But the thing is, the Chinese, the Russians, Iranians, and other adversaries are utilizing their partners, just like they are doing in terms of how they move illicit fentanyl precursors into this country. They're moving humans in the same fashion, and we need to treat it as such.
John Torres, what additional measures could be implemented to enhance our border security against threats posed by the Chinese and Russian activities?
There's a couple different things that the government can do right now. One is, in addition to putting the pressure on the southern border, which, as we all know, as soon as you shut down one area, the people that are looking to move drugs or people across the border will take the path of least resistance, and in this case, it may be the northern border. So one, they need to coordinate more closely with our Canadian counterparts to make sure it is not so easy to get into Canada. And we are seeing that those discussions have already taken place, and they continue as we go forward. And second is to send more resources. Congress needs to work closely with the Department of Homeland Security to get more resources on the northern border, more Border Patrol agents, as well as sensors, cameras, and other types of tools to their disposal, including drones, so that they control especially some of those vast areas across the northern border.
And John Fishwick, I want to get your thoughts on this too. How important is it to increase alertness on the northern border?
Yeah, so bad guys are sometimes very smart, and so they see that all the resources are on our southern border, and so they may want to take advantage of coming through our northern border, which is vast. And so definitely we've got to increase the security there. And then obviously the challenge with folks from China and Russia is they could have significant resources backing their efforts to enter our country and then to do really bad things once they are here. So in many ways, that may be a greater threat. And so it needs to take a high priority for our country. And that means resources. That means not just intelligence on where they are and how they're moving, but obviously more resources at the border, more security guards there and folks from the various federal agencies to make sure they're not entering our country. And that's going to be a challenge because it's a massive border.
Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem is planning to visit El Salvador, where the U.S. has deported about 240 alleged Tren de Aragua gang members. Federal Judge Boasberg has blocked further deportations and said that those who claim that they're not part of the gang should be allowed to challenge their removal. John Fishwick, do you think that they have a right to do this, and how does this impact the administration's work on the border and deportations?
Well, the Trump administration has been very aggressive on, deportations and finding illegal citizens and have them removed from our country. Remember, these gang members can be removed really one of two ways. The current law, before the Alien Enemies Act was instituted by the Trump administration, says basically they can be removed. They're entitled to a hearing. But ultimately, if they're a gang member with crimes on their record, they're going to be removed. The issue is, can the Trump administration remove them in the way that they did recently before the judge stopped it, which is you don't have a hearing. We can load you up on an airplane and remove you. That's going to be decided, I think, ultimately by the Supreme Court. I think Judge Boasberg has indicated he's going to prevent that from happening. But I think this case, the Alien Enemies Act from 1798, hasn't been used that much in our country's history, and I think it's going to make its way to the Supreme Court, where they're going to have to decide, can you remove these gang members without a hearing instantly or not? I think ultimately the Supreme Court is going to broadly protect the President of the United States' executive powers. They're going to say in foreign affairs, the president has more say over this than a judge.
And John Torres, your thoughts on this, and also what the current morale is among agents on the ground?
So I'll start with the morale on the ground is significantly better from the people that I'm talking to. They're finally allowed to enforce the law that they swore an oath to do. For the last 4 years under the Biden administration, they were pretty much handcuffed, and the policies that were implemented that now really force them to use their discretion and look the other way in a lot of the different cases that are out there. So the morale is up. With regards to how I think the Alien Enemies Act should be or whether or not it should be used, I think that the government should use all the tools in their disposal moving forward. And I agree 100% that this is going to end up being decided by the courts going forward. But I do believe that the president can designate who is a terrorist and who is an enemy combatant, and we should be able to go forward with that using those types of laws that are on the books. So we've always said as agents that all we can do is enforce the laws that are on the books. And if the people across the country don't like those laws, they should contact their Congress representatives and get those laws changed. And we know how that's gone over the last 40 years, that there has not been, an immigration reform bill passed going all the way back to President Reagan.
Now, Secretary of State Marco Rubio is set to visit Jamaica, Guyana, and Suriname this week. He mentioned concerns about citizenship by investment programs and that they attract nefarious actors from countries like China and Iran. John Fishwick, what does he refer to here, and how does it become a security challenge?
Well, I think the Trump administration is making illegal immigration kind of job one for them. President Trump ran on that during the campaign. And so they're looking for every angle here, whether it's a cartel member trying to penetrate our country, or, as we talked about earlier, somebody from a terrorist from China or Russia, and then through the Caribbean, kind of through money means, using, kind of illegal money means to get illegal citizens in our country. I think Secretary of State Rubio is looking for all angles here. He wants to make sure, particularly the Caribbean nations that he's visiting during this trip, that they're cooperating with us on this illegal immigration problem. I think he's aware of, he comes from Florida. He knows how this works. So I think he's a good spokesperson for this challenge.
John Torres, John Fishwick, thank you both very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
One doctor standing up for freedom of belief and against forced organ harvesting in China was just honored by the Senate House in Rome, Italy. She received the Excellent Woman Award for her commitment to medical ethics.
Dr. Angela Capolo is the president of the Italian Falun Dafa Association. Falun Dafa is a spiritual practice based on the principles of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. But the Chinese Communist Party has used all means to persecute its followers, including forced live organ harvesting. Dr. Angela Capolo, who has worked to raise awareness of this atrocity, said at the event that the medical community should not accept this crime. For us, an organ transplant for a patient in China may very well mean that a Falun Dafa practitioner will be killed and become an organ donor.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you soon.